with Adam. Let's kick things off here with something that we knew was going to happen. It's happened in basically all of the gaming industry that we've gone through. Listen, there was the poker boom. There were a million poker sites, and then they all kind of came back together. There was the DFS boom. There were all kinds of DFS sites, and then things kind of came back down to normal. We knew it in the sports betting world as well, who was going to come, who was going to be, really here with staying power, and then who might be kind of on the fringe. And then there were some that were maybe even outside of the fringe, and I think that's probably where both of these fall.
What we end up with here, Matt, is one regional operator, and by regional I pretty much mean one state, and then one of the operators that we expected might at least be able to make a little bit of a name for itself just because of the backing that it had, because some of the partnership deals that it had. But we see both Sahara Bets and Betway decide to get out of the U.S. sports betting market. Now, if you're not familiar with Sahara Bets, that means you live outside Arizona. Arizona, you and I have talked about many times, was one of the more interesting test markets because of the number of available licenses, the low tax structure, and the fact that just about everyone was starting from the same starting line at the beginning of the market, like Colorado, another one of these interesting markets where we got to see a competitive environment and what that would lead to in the long run. Now, there have been some interesting success cases in a place like Arizona. If you look like Desert Diamond and what they've been able to do, they've actually made a real impact in Arizona. Sahara Bets was never really able to do the same, of course, affiliated with the Coyotes, and that has gone its own way as well in Arizona. Not the only hockey connection, though, because now we talk about Supergroup and Betway. Betway was a major sponsor in the NHL. In fact, for the last few years, you cannot watch an NHL game without seeing Betway emblazoned down below the goal line in every arena in the NHL. And it's funny because you would see it then right alongside BetMGM ads for one of the official sports betting partners of the NHL. So you notice that there was that overlap there. But Betway essentially said, this is not a path to success for us in the U.S. market. They're going to continue to operate internationally. More consolidation, and really, Matt, not what we've talked about before with a points bet or someone like that, where there are a lot of pieces to pick up. This is one of those where the market share was so ultimately insignificant that it's not that like this would make a big difference for anyone to say, okay, let's try to come in and acquire the bones or acquire the database and turn it into something for ourselves. We're talking about a fraction of market share for both of these operators in the states in which they were active. It continues to lead to us discussing the duopoly at the top, of course, with FanDuel and DraftKings, but then really that third and fourth tier that Barry Jonas at Truist Securities detailed a few podcasts ago, where he talked about who else might be able to maybe not make their way to the top of the podium, but at least forge a sustainable path for sports betting in the United States.
Yeah, it was, as you mentioned, with Betway. They were one of the ones that came out and, had this sponsorship over in New Jersey with the Devils. And they were, I think that dates back all the way to like 2021 when they were doing all of that stuff. And the Philadelphia Flyers, obviously a big partnership with those guys as well with all of that. And like you said, this is a real betting company, right? I mean, this is a group that's been around for a while and certainly internationally has some play. But it was just one of those things, Adam, where we've tried to figure it out with some of these groups that we know what they're doing, it's not like they're just kind of like Johnny come lately, but why there has not been able to be any sort of traction whatsoever made with all of this. I mean, we can go back and obviously we knew brand recognition was going to do something for DraftKings and FanDuel, but man, I'm now looking at all of this and the way that this has gone with gaming giants, right? Even MGM and Caesars and Bet365 and all of these different companies that we thought, look, they have a decent chance of cracking in here and certainly breaking through. You saw the people, we talked ad nauseum about the ads that ran. And now looking back on this, it probably was for the better for them. They caught hell whenever they were running ads every 30 seconds, but it probably worked out for them in the long run, right? Because it's we just see it doesn't really matter. We know these other companies know what they're doing. We know they've got the chops. It just isn't breaking through.
Well, Matt, let's go ahead and look at what you would see as you whistle your way through the graveyard of sports betting brands in the United States, as we dig deeper into what you're talking about here. I'll read the list from the story that Pat Evans has at LegalSportsReport.com right now. And these are brands where you're going to hear a lot of different sizes and shapes, but all ended up in the same place. Barstool, FoxBet, Fubo Sportsbook, MaximBet, PlayUp, PointsBet, TwinSpires, and William Hill. I mean, think about what we talked about with a brand like FoxBet having an NFL broadcast connection and then ultimately getting swallowed up inside the Flutter umbrella and essentially had the pillow put over its face by FanDuel and Flutter, to the point where FoxBet really wasn't able to make any sort of impact. And then you look at some of the smaller entries like a MaximBet, where you kind of tilt your head to the side like a dog and say, what exactly were you thinking as you tried to launch that brand? So now you see where we have those companies like 365, like the legacy casino companies that you mentioned with MGM and Caesars, and you start to ask the question of like, all right, so how are you going to differentiate yourself, right? Because they were part of that advertising blitz, at least MGM and Caesars were part of that real big push early on, but they decided to pull back from it. FanDuel, DraftKings really hasn't pulled back as much, and they, of course, were working on products from a long time before we were dealing with ads. You mentioned a long time ago that these ads were not nearly as bad as what we went through in 2015 with DFS. The messaging was significantly better. It didn't come off like a get-rich-quick scheme. So I think they managed to ride that line a lot better this time, even though there is federal legislation pending that would regulate sports betting advertising. We never saw the critical mass call for it to stop the way we did in the DFS wars.
Yeah. Unibet also in there as well as another one that didn't make it. Another brand that is, has some bones, has some chops in the gaming space. And you just kind of look at it and shake your head. You just wonder what's going on here. And I know that we keep saying, we've said it for a few years here on the podcast, Adam. I mean, this dates all the way back to when Dustin was on here with us. We were saying, you know what, this isn't over, right? I mean, there is still plenty of time for these other brands to come in and other brands to figure things out. And I'm becoming less optimistic that it's going to be a wide open race, over the next few years. That's not to say that MGM and Caesars can't gain some ground. That's not to say that who knows what Fanatics may or may not be able to do. I'm not completely ruling all of that out, but it is starting to seem a little bit more likely that the two at the top might just be the two at the top.
Yeah, the case is clear if you're bullish on FanDuel and DraftKings, and I think the biggest part of that case that you have to be willing to buy into is that eventually the expenses will come down, and I think you also have to buy into the fact that there is not a point of diminishing returns on churning through players on parlays and SGPs at these high holds that don't return a whole lot to the player, right? There has to be some thought that you will continue to be able to bring in $5, $10, $20 players along the road to keep going through these long shot parlays that aren't going to pay off the same way. You have to believe in that, and you have to believe in the fact that they won't have to be on TV as much forever to really buy into that duopoly. I'll leave that to you out there to figure out how you think that'll shape up. And Matt, I think you brought up a great point a few podcasts ago when you said you talked to some people in the Las Vegas casino space where you'd said, like, listen, why isn't there more alignment with rewards and sports betting when it comes to these legacy casino companies? And, I believe you discussed that there wasn't always the same priority being placed on sports betting inside the legacy casino operators that there is for companies like FanDuel and DraftKings that have to in order to survive.
Yeah, no, 100%. And then, at the end of the day, while we're not as bullish on casino getting legalized as we were a couple of years ago, it is going to get legalized in a few states. I mean, it's going to happen in some time over the next few years. And with that, like I said, that's just another way to kind of ease the cost of customer acquisition. There's some people that are going to be coming in through that funnel. There are some people that will be going through the sports betting funnel into the casino side of things with DraftKings and FanDuel. We know that DraftKings already made a big acquisition in Golden Nugget Gaming. We know that FanDuel already had it in the Flutter, had already had the online casino stuff in their hold. So, I mean, it's just, I don't know. I thought that there really would be a race. I wasn't just doing that to kind of throw that out there and have a talking point for us here on the podcast. But man, it just seems to me now the more I see this, the more that I think that they understand the customer, I think, a little bit better than a lot of these people and are just doing it a little bit better. I just don't know. I don't know. I thought that I really did. I thought that it was going to be open, and I think I'm changing my opinion on that.
Well, Matt, I think you're getting to the point where we discussed for so long, when would product matter, right? Mm-hmm. And product matters now in two ways. Obviously, customers are declaring their intent with their feet when the bonuses aren't the same. We understand that. But there's a second part of that discussion as well that I don't think it's talked about as much. And it's that DraftKings, FanDuel, tech-forward companies that have been tech-only companies for quite a while now are companies that have been working on refining product in the last couple of years at the same time that other companies have had to redo their product and relaunch their products. They haven't had to go through it. You have not heard about the DraftKings 2.0 platform or the FanDuel 2.0 platform, right? But you've heard about it with Caesars, and you've heard about it with MGM, and you've heard about it with Bally, and you've heard about it with a number of other companies that have had to go through saying, we're essentially going to be wasting time by continuing on with a product that we know doesn't work for some length of time while we redevelop the new product and try to catch up to these companies that not only were able to do better with their tech from the beginning and add to their tech in some cases with some of the acquisitions they made, but then also they've been refining it along the way. And now we're getting to the point where you're changing your opinion, and I understand why, because the time to catch those companies was when they were hemorrhaging hundreds of millions of dollars a year, right? When the losses were absolutely massive for them. And now you're getting to the point where the losses are narrowing. And when the losses start to narrow and these companies aren't having to worry about what DraftKings did, which was freezing a bunch of open positions and doing layoffs at one point, then you're just talking about dealing from a position of strength while others are catching up.